It's time for Herd Mentality, the weekly episode where you control the discussion today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, folks, welcome in. Herd Mentality is the plan for today. Got a bunch of creative and interesting questions to dive into. Let's get started. First one comes from Wedge Breaker, who says, Joe, the opening regular season game at the brand new Highmark Stadium is September 2026. 2 full seasons will go down before that game. We have a few certainties to expect to see that day, but it's still in the distant future. One certainty I envision is Josh Allen leading the offense. Josh is the catalyst for current and future Buffalo Bills success, but I'm asking you to pull out your crystal ball and look at the Bills sideline and boots. Give me at least 6 names on the current Bills roster, coaching staff and front office, that will be there for that day. Fun question here from Wedgebreaker. And let me also say this. I hope to be there for that day as well. I don't typically have a lot of requests for like a birthday present, but I told my wife last year, and I turned 40 in 2026. I said, babe, for my 40th birthday, I want tickets to the first game at the new Highmark Stadium. I said, whatever it takes, get those tickets. And so I'm excited to be there. I think it will happen, but obviously I'll celebrate that moment when those tickets are secured. But I hope to be one of the lucky people to be in the stadium for that opening game. But to your question here, who's going to be around in 2026? Let's first start by identifying the players that are currently under contract in the 2026 season. So all of the 2024 rookies, so all of the draft picks from this past year, Keon Coleman, Cole Bishop, Ray Davis, those guys, plus the undrafted free agents, all of those guys are signed through 2026. Other players are Josh Allen, Von Miller, Matt Milano, Ed Oliver, Deion Dawkins, Taron Johnson, Dawson Knox, Tyler Bass, Curtis Samuel, Dalton Kincaid, Taylor Rapp, Osiris Torrance, Dorian Williams, and Justin Shorter. So now my task is to tell you 6 names that will still be on the Bills roster, coaching staff, and front office. Number 1, Josh Allen. He's going to be there, right? This is, in some ways, the stadium that his presence and status in the league kind of leads to this, right? I think you can tip your hat to Josh Allen and feel like he's responsible for a lot of this stadium being built. He'll be around. I think Sean McDermott will be around. I don't really see a path for Terry Pagula actually making the decision to move on from Sean McDermott. I mean, the bottom would have to fall out and he'd have to lose the team. I don't foresee that happening in the next 2 seasons. I think Brandon Beane will be your general manager. I think Keon Coleman will be around. It'll be him entering the 3rd season of his rookie deal. And so he'll be extension eligible after that season. I think that Keon Coleman will for sure be around. I think Osiris Torrance will for sure be around. It'll be the last year of his rookie deal, and him being a day one starter, starting and playing every single game and snap last season. And just thinking about the trajectory of the offensive guard market, we literally just saw last night Quinn Miners with the Denver Broncos sign a 4-year, $80 million deal. He's their guard, one of their starting guards. He's a very good player, but that's a $20 million a year guard. And we've seen several players enter that stratosphere. Landon Dickerson's at $21 million. Robert Hunt's a $20 million a year guard. Quinn Miners is now part of that club. So these guards are becoming expensive, and we're going to have some interesting conversations about those dynamics and Osiris Torrance in a couple of years, but I foresee him being around in 2026. And then the last name to get me to 6 players is Dalton Kincaid. That would be the last year of his rookie deal before his 5th-year option. And I think that Dalton Kincaid is going to be a fixture for this Bills team for a long time. So those players and coaches and I guess personnel guy, those are the 6 that I see. I think you can certainly make a case for an Ed Oliver to still be around. He certainly makes sense to me as a young player that already has a value contract. But beyond that, who knows, right? Rosters turn over quick in the NFL. And I don't think the Bills will be an exception. There's going to be quite a few different players in the fray come 2 seasons from now. But obviously, we're all excited about that stadium opening, and those are some of the players and coaches that I think will be around. Mark says, according to Next Gen Stats, Keon Coleman, amongst the top 8 wide receivers at the combine when recording top-end speed, was tied for second on a go route at 21.7 miles per hour. Second in slot strike at 18.4 miles per hour. Third on slant routes at 19.45 miles per hour. It would seem Keon has top-end speed competitive with the rest of his peers. Why is Coleman not able to separate currently? And are there areas he can improve upon to become a separator? So, there's a lot to unpack here. The first thing that I'll say, absent of any data that you just provided, there's nothing athletically restrictive about Keon Coleman and separation, right? Like, the reason he's not a premier separator at this point in time when studying his tape at Florida State isn't because of athletic deficiencies. That's not the story here. There's so much more to athleticism outside of a 40-yard dash time. That's not my concern. And one thing that I would say about all of the routes that you just identified, those are all vertical plane routes. None of those routes have a horizontal break. And that's the concern. I think Keon Coleman is plenty explosive, plenty athletic to be a good separator in the NFL. It's some of his rigidity, like he's kind of rigid in and out of breaks, kind of robotic when he's having to make those hard horizontal breaks. I think that's one area where you draw some concerns about Keon Coleman and separation. Then on top of that, I think there's some technique stuff, right? Where his path to being a good separator is to be able to stack and get on top of corners, create leverage, and make corners and defensive backs play through him. And so I think he's got to develop that technique to really utilize his size and physicality to get on top of guys and win leverage battles, right? That's going to be the name of the game for him. He's going to win as a route runner very, very differently than some of the top targets Josh Allen's had, like a Steph Diggs, like a John Brown, like a Cole Beasley, like an Emmanuel Sanders. This is a fundamentally different player. And so all of those quick whip routes and sudden change of directions and all of that's not really going to be the thing with Keon Coleman. He's going to win differently, and it comes from his physicality, size, and making guys play through him to get to the football. And I think he'll be a very good player on the vertical plane, where he's have to run posts and seams and go routes and fades and all of that. Like, he'll be good at that because of his acceleration and his physicality. It's when you're asking him to really sink his hips and change directions on a hard horizontal break. That's where you're kind of concerned about Keon Coleman, the route runner. And so I think everything about Keon Coleman as a route runner is teachable stuff because I do think he's got a lot of physical tools to work with. I'm not concerned about the 40-yard dash in this conversation. It's mastering technique and then figuring out how he can be very deceptive with his horizontal breaks, because I don't think he's going to be super quick, sudden, or snappy through those turns. So that's where this whole conversation goes for me. All right, folks, tons more to get to here on the other side of it. We're going to talk drop rate and Josh Allen. some of the economic value of Dawson Knox, Dorian Williams, all kinds of stuff. So be sure to stick with me. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime that I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. And they've got some fun futures bets on the Buffalo Bills that you can get in on. Some of these over-unders on production really stand out to me. Right now, they have James Cook's rushing yards in 2024 set at 875.5. You can bet the over on that, I think. Josh Allen's passing yards, they have it set at 3,750.5. I think you could smash the over there. And this one's interesting. Dalton Kincaid, his over-under is now set at 800.5 receiving yards, which is up from 775.5, where it's been kind of hanging out for about the last month or so. So maybe there's some action coming in on Dalton Kincaid, and FanDuel's kind of upping that total. So check it out. If you want to get in on the action, head on over to FanDuel.com and start making the most of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, folks, the next one today comes from Peter. Peter says, I'm fully bought in on the economic benefits to having a tight end being the number one option in the passing game. Can you give me some examples on where that $15 to $20 million of cap savings could be reallocated? Off the top of my head, I think it's something like Daquan Jones and Connor McGovern versus vet minimum type players. Or looking forward, it would be like keeping Shakir without a corresponding cap casualty. So Peter is referencing a conversation that we've been having for a couple of years now on this podcast, and that the value of a tight end as a focal point of your passing offense is so beneficial with the salary cap, because wide receivers are just paid a whole lot more than tight ends. You've got 21 wide receivers in the NFL right now that are getting paid north of $20 million a season. You have 0 tight ends that are getting paid north of $20 million. And you've seen guys like Justin Jefferson, they're now at the $35 million per year mark, where you don't even have a single tight end that's over 20. So that's where Peter's getting this $15 to $20 million opportunity in cap savings by not paying a number one receiver, but paying a top tight end. And, you know, that might look a little bit different in a couple of years when we're talking extension for Dalton Kincaid, but I think the reality is Peter's right. It's probably about $15 million that you now have to reallocate because you're not paying it towards the tight end. So here's a very practical application of that. Right now, looking at 2024 cap hits, Daquan Jones is $4.5 million. Connor McGovern is $4.2 million. Rasul Douglas is $3.3 million. And Curtis Samuel is $3.4 million. That is $15.4 million in cap space. So a starting nose tackle, a starting center, a starting corner, and a starting key piece of your offense in Curtis Samuel. That's what you get. And so I really like that idea. I want to cast a wide net. I want as many good players as possible. And I think that you need to have star power. There's no question about it. But doing it in an economic way makes a lot of sense. And I think that example of Daquan Jones, Connor McGovern, Curtis Samuel, Rasul Douglas being the difference in paying a tight end top of market versus paying a wide receiver top of market. And that's only $15.4 million. So add AJ Epinesa in that mix if you want to get to 20. Plenty of great opportunity through that lens of a tight end being the focal point of your passing game. Chris says, it seems like every year we talk about receivers on the Bills who are having drops issues, from Gabe Davis, Dawson Knox, James Cook, and even Stephon Diggs. From what I can tell, it seems like when we're discussing those receivers' issues with catching the ball, the blame seems to go towards the receiver and not the quarterback. My question to you, based on the tape that I know you watch after every game, is there something about the way Josh Allen throws the ball that can make it difficult at times for receivers to catch it? Does he sometimes have issues with his ball placement, or is he sometimes throwing the ball too hard and without enough touch on the football? Are there times in games where Josh is wound too tight, and does this cause issues with his ability to deliver an accurate pass? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I would also like to get your thoughts on the criticism that seems to focus on the receivers dropping passes is warranted or overblown. Really good question here from Chris. I absolutely believe that there's an element to drops that involves a quarterback. There's no question about it. And I don't think Josh Allen is a top-end player when it comes to ball placement, right? I think he's got general accuracy. I don't think he has pinpoint accuracy. He has moments of pinpoint accuracy, but I think more times than not, he's a generally accurate quarterback that his ball placement can be inconsistent at times. And I'm hoping that the work that he's done to improve some mechanics this offseason will get him to a place more like what we saw in 2020 and 2021. So, yes, first off, yes, there is an element to the quarterback that is important for when considering drops. That said, any drop metrics that I ever reference on this podcast either come from Fantasy Points Data Suite or Pro Football Focus, and I'm very familiar with how they charge drops and they consider the placement of the ball. They also consider that it can't be a contested catch opportunity, and they have to have a reasonable opportunity to make the catch. They're not going to charge you a drop for not being able to haul in an extraordinary acrobatic catch attempt, right? It's a play that you would consider to be routine to the game. So that's important to reference there. Now, the next thing I want to mention here is Josh Allen's drop rate per season and where it ranks amongst the NFL. And I think that there is an interesting correlation here. So in 2023, the drop rate was 6.8%. That was 8th in the NFL, so 8th highest drop rate. 2022, it was 8.7%, number 1, so the highest drop rate. 2021, 6.2%, 14th. 2020, 5.9%, 20th. 2019, 10%, first. 2018, 10.6%, second worst. So he's got 2 seasons. He's got 3 seasons in the top 2. He's got 4 seasons in the top 25%. And he's got 2 seasons where one was 14th and one was 20th. I think it's fair to point out that I think Josh Allen's 2 most accurate seasons were 2020 and 2021, where his drop rate was the lowest of his career. I think his most inaccurate seasons, his first 2, 2018 and 2019, the highest drop rate of his career. Also the worst weapons of his career, right? That's important to mention. So, and then I would say that even this past season, like maybe the weapons weren't what you wanted them to be, his 3rd highest drop rate of his career. So, yeah, I think that there is an element of Josh Allen's fault with this. I think it's interesting that his best 2 seasons of lowest drop rate were his most accurate seasons. But again, I think that even with all that in mind, there's some very disappointing drops and frequency of drops that are not Josh Allen's fault. Think about those James Cooks drop touchdowns, some of those Dawson Knox drops, some of those Gabe Davis drops. I mean, it doesn't matter who was throwing that ball. Those guys got to catch it. So, yeah, it's partly on Josh, but it's also very much on the guys that should be catching the football. Ray says, Joe, have you heard anything about Dorian Williams this offseason? He stands out in my mind as having the most underrated potential on the team this year. What do you see as his role this season? Could he be another Terrel Bernard in waiting? The linebacker unit is fascinating to me. I can't believe they meant to go into last year with only 2.5 playable linebackers for the season, especially since one of them was unproven. This year has been different, to say the least. Hopefully they don't overdo it at the expense of another unit. But how much has that whole unit underrated by everyone this year? Hopefully the injury gremlin had his fill on the Bills players, and we get to see the magic of 58 and 43 for a full season. It's a good question here, Ray, and I'm going to do an entire podcast on the linebackers, probably either with one of the last 2 shows this week or early next week. Because there's some fascinating conversations to have, and I think one of them is Dorian Williams. Now, ideally, Terrel Bernard and Matt Milano play every snap this season, and your utilization for any linebacker not named Bernard and Milano really just comes from sub packages and situationally going to 3 linebackers. But obviously, we know that there's a chance that there could be injuries, and then that begs the question, who is linebacker 3? Is it Dorian Williams? Is it Nicholas Moreau? Is it Daquan Jones? Is it Balin Spector? I think what Dorian Williams has going for him in this conversation is the most meaningful investment in a depth linebacker is Dorian Williams as a third-round pick, right? The Bills have the most invested in him. And so that's going to position him well to be linebacker 3. But if he's linebacker 3, which he's not going to be 1 or 2, right? Milano and Bernard, that's 1 and 2. How much of an opportunity does LB3 have in this defense when you're base nickel? Does the shift across the league in bigger personnel, particularly for the teams the Bills are playing this year, the Ravens, the Lions, the Chiefs, we know that the Dolphins use 21 personnel a ton. The Rams are a team that's going to use some two-back stuff. The 49ers, like the Bills are going to face a lot of heavier personnel teams. Come on now. The Patriots are going to be another big personnel team. There's so many of these matchups on the schedule to be mindful of. And so does that lead to more 3 linebacker stuff? If it does, is it Dorian Williams? We haven't really heard as much about Dorian Williams to this point. He'll certainly be a player I'm interested in checking out at training camp. But to me, the involvement of the third linebacker depends on who it is and what they prove they can do. If they perform at a level that demands playing time, I'm sure the Bills coaching staff will find ways to get them on the field. But more likely than not, it's filling a role as a backup if Bernard or Milano goes down. It's when they go 3 linebackers, which is probably a small percent of the time, getting those opportunities. And then special teams, right? I think that's going to be a big role for these linebackers, especially with the new kickoff rule. So there's a lot of different elements to this. And you can talk me into a lot of different possibilities, although I think it's important to point out that the biggest investment in any depth linebacker is that third-round pick in Dorian Williams. And, the Bills have, to me, clear options in Milano and Bernard, and Milano's signed, right? Like, it's not like his contract's up anytime soon. And I expect him to be a high-level performer for this defense. So what's the path for Dorian Williams? It's kind of hard to identify right now. At least nothing obvious stands out to me, unless the team has some intentions that I'm unfamiliar with, which is totally possible. It's probably a depth role for Dorian Williams this season, barring an injury where he's thrust into action. And if so, is it him? It's going to be fascinating to find out. All right, folks, so many more great questions to get to. Be sure to stick with me. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, folks, so much more to get to here in this last segment. The next one comes from Dent. Dent says, which position groups on the Bills do you think have the biggest drop-off between our starters and the first player off the bench? I think this is a good way to look at where injuries can hurt the quality of our play the most. Good question from Dent here. Obviously, number one is quarterback Josh Allen to Mitch Trubisky for me. That's a huge drop-off. Number 2, 3, and 4 is all offensive line stuff. I put center at number 2 with McGovern to either Will Clapp or Cedric Van Granger. I think that would be a big hit for this Bills offensive line if Connor McGovern went down. I think then offensive tackle where you have Dawkins and Brown as a stud pair of starters. And then the OT3 is Ryan Vandemark, who we really haven't seen play in regular season games. I'm excited about his trajectory. I like what I've seen in preseason. I like the pedigree, but what is he really? We don't know. And then I'd say very similar to the offensive guard position where it's David Edwards and Osiris Torrance, and then it's who's coming in. Is it Lyle Collins? Is his body even allow him to play at this point? Is he too beat up? Alec Anderson kind of falls into the Ryan Vandermark bucket where we like the athleticism, the pedigree, the trajectory. Haven't really seen him play in the regular season. So I think those offensive line spots for me are 2, 3, and 4. Then at number 5, I go to defensive tackle, Ed Oliver and Daquan Jones to Austin Johnson. And I think Austin Johnson's a very good player, but I think Ed Oliver and Daquan Jones are really good players, right? Like to me, it's just the drop off where I want to see Ed and Daquan together. Then I go to linebacker, Terrel Bernard and Matt Milano, number 6 to whoever it is, Dorian Williams or Nicholas Moreau. I would say safety is number 7, Mike Edwards, Taylor Rapp. I assume they're the starters. Then the other guys are like Cole Bishop, Damar Hamlin, Cam Lewis. Number 8 is running back James Cook to Ty Johnson and Ray Davis. Number 9 is defensive end, so like Epinesa is the starter. And then it's Von Miller / Dwan Smoot as the next guy. And then the bottom 3 or really the bottom 2. Tight end, Kincaid to Knox. You feel like there's a pretty small drop-off there. I mean, not that certainly Kincaid's a better player, but I mean, Knox has been a starter for this team. Cornerback, Rasul Douglas, Christian Benford to Kyrie Elam. I have a lot of confidence in Kyrie Elam. I think he's played well when he's been given opportunities. And then I put wide receiver last just because I don't really, I mean, the utilization of the wide receivers could be very different on a weekly basis. I would be most concerned if the team were to lose Khalil Shakir. I think he's the most important receiver entering 2024. But I don't really know how to apply this question to that because I think the Bills are going to play a lot of different receivers and it could vary week to week. So that's kind of how I see it. It's Josh Allen, it's offensive line, and then defensive tackle. And then of course, linebacker as well, but then safety, running back, defensive end, tight end, corner, pretty comfortable with at least the first guy off the bench in those spots. Next one comes from Johnny, who says, was wondering if you could go into depth a little bit more about what you're looking for in players during training camp, specifically regarding positions like the wide receivers. What specific things would you observe that would indicate less targets or more targets for the upcoming season? Additionally, I'm curious what you're most excited to observe during your time at training camp. So first of all, yes, I'm very excited to get to training camp. I will be there for the practices on July 28th, 29th, 30th, August 1st, and the blue-red scrimmage on August 2nd. I'm looking forward to that blue-red scrimmage. I'm bringing my daughter, Rebecca Jean, to that, in addition to my wife. It's going to be pretty cool. My daughter's been bugging to go to Buffalo and see Josh Allen, and so she's going to have an opportunity to do that for the scrimmage on August 2nd. I don't think she's never been in a stadium like that either, so it should be a really, really cool experience. What am I looking for? It's where guys are lining up and with what units, right? What opportunities are they getting in camp? That's going to tell me a lot about how the coaching staff perceives them based on the opportunities that are there. And then, of course, what do they do with those opportunities? I think that's really going to say a lot. If you're seeing guys not get any run with the first teams, not even in a rotational capacity, that matters, right? So it's where guys are lining up and with what units. That's going to be the first piece of information that I'll be diving into. And then, of course, how do they perform with the opportunities that they're given? Outside of that, I think you can kind of get a feel for the confidence of players. I'm going to be credentialed for these practices, so I'll be able to be on the sidelines and taking everything in. And being able to kind of be around the players and just have a feel for what their level of confidence is in the assignments that they're given. You can kind of pick up on that stuff. I love to pick up on practice habits. I think in attending, whether it's Senior Bowl practices, Shrine Bowl practices, I've been to a lot of Carolina Panthers practices. I've been to a lot of Bills practices over the last few years. You kind of get a feel for guys' practice habits. Who's the first guys on the field? Who's staying after? How dialed in are they? Are they first up through drills? What is their energy like through drills? Like, that's the stuff that I like to try to pick up on as well. And I've always enjoy finding those standouts because those typically wind up being key players for the team. And, I've had the chance to watch like a Luke Kuechly practice, a Thomas Davis, Julius Peppers, Steph Diggs. I've seen these guys practice and there's something different about, those upper echelon players and what they do on the practice field. So I love to kind of figure all that out. So that's what's standing out to me. That's what I'll be thinking about. And obviously the storylines abound with this team. I could go on for days about specifics, whether it's wide receivers or Connor McGovern at center. What is Cole Bishop doing? What does the kickoff practices look like? Who is that third linebacker? Is anybody competing in spots that you might not have anticipated? What's the rotation with the defensive line? There's so much stuff. And obviously camp's next week, so we'll start to get into all of that very, very soon. Josh says, two-part question, looking across historical trends in the NFL, when did punters become the main holder for kicks? Quarterbacks used to do it, a la Tony Romo, when he botched the hold in the playoffs. So does Browning have to hold, or could another game day active guy take that duty? No, punters have to be the holder. Like, they don't have to, but they have to be the holder. This really shifted in the early 2000s, where you saw teams move away from backup quarterbacks and other players to be holders. And one thing that I'll always point out is when that shift happened, the effectiveness of field goals just skyrocketed up. Think about it like this. Morton Anderson, okay, Hall of Fame kicker. His career made percentage, 79.7%. And he was a kicker in the NFL from 1982 to 2007. You are not going to stay employed in today's NFL with that field goal made percentage. You are not going to keep a job. And he's a Hall of Famer. And on top of that, he was a dome kicker for most of his career with the Saints and the Falcons. He was in the league 25 years, 21 seasons with the Saints and Falcons playing in domes. Sub 80% field goal made percentage. So Bill Belichick spoke on this recently. And he said punters got to be the holders, because punters and kickers have time together in practice to game plan, watch film. They have reps during practice, and no other position player can do that. Not the backup. You can't pull the backup quarterback away from the quarterback room and the offense to practice these field goals. Okay. You're never going to be able to establish that level of chemistry and timing because of the time that exists for practice. And that is huge. Additionally, punters, they're already accustomed to taking snaps from the long snapper because they receive them when they're punting. It's just every piece of logic tells you that it has to be the punter. From the time perspective, from the fact that they're used to catching from the long snapper, to what the results have been. I mean, the good kickers in the NFL are making 90% of their field goals. I would guess that since teams started using position players, I bet you there's a 10% jump in field goal made percentage. So it's got to be the punter. It's got to be the punter. I talked to a former NFL kicker, Jake Arians. He's been on this podcast. It was a few years ago, because it feels like this holder conversation never goes away. And he talked about when he was in Buffalo, Jay Remersma was the holder. And he said it was ridiculous. He said he'd come in, he'd have to hold for a field goal. His hands are bloody from having to block. And he would take the ball, and instead of putting his finger on the tip of the ball, he put like his hand flat on it. He's like, I couldn't do it. And he wound up having like the worst year of his career. So you got to have it. It's got to be the punter. There's just no other logical explanation for it to be anyone else. It has to be your punter. Notorious DPG says, given the projected roster, are there any guys on other rosters you could see a trade target like Rasul Douglas last year? We have draft capital to pursue options midseason. Well, I think, first of all, what I'm excited to see for the Bills probably is Brandon Beane allow this to play out. They got a little bit of cap space. They got tons of draft capital. They can see what the needs are and make a move if necessary during the season. And right now, everybody thinks they're going to win 10 games and go to the playoffs, right? Every team, every fan base thinks that's true. It's not the time to get a trade done. Let the season play out, see what your needs are, see who becomes sellers. And they extended the trade deadline moving forward. It's now week 9. So you got an extra week of season to consider any trades that you want to make. And I would be looking towards teams that have new regimes and are, not necessarily on the track to being in the playoffs. Teams that have new general managers this year, the Chargers, the Commanders, the Raiders, the Patriots, and the Panthers. So I'd be looking at those teams as your real opportunity to pluck players, because a lot of the players that exist on those rosters weren't brought in by that regime. And as you know, new regime means new roster. If they didn't bring you in, they don't care about you, they're going to get you out of there. So think about the Chargers, a guy like maybe a Khalil Mack or a Nick Bosa. Commanders have John Allen as a defensive tackle. They have some talent as well at wide receiver, maybe if you wanted to go after it. Jahan Dotson or something like that. The Raiders, could Devontae Adams become available during the season? I don't think you're going to get something done with the Patriots. Carolina Panthers, what does their season look like? Is it falling off the rails? Is there a player that makes sense? And you can look at the team, the Bills, and say, well, maybe they'll need a receiver, maybe they'll need a pass rusher, but who really knows? Who really knows? The top two needs that everybody had going into last season, right tackle, middle linebacker, were complete non-concerns. So maybe pass rush and wide receiver won't be the concerns, and we'll be thinking about something else. So I love the idea of letting it play out, see what the needs are, and then approach these conversations when you really get an idea for who's going to be selling. Last one here today comes from Brian, who says, could this be a chance? And he's referring to the Bills having joint practices with the Pittsburgh Steelers in Pittsburgh that was recently announced. Could this be a chance for Damar Hamlin to chat with Coach Tomlin to be ready to head to Steel City? I think that's a very good idea that Brian had, and one that I hadn't seen previously, where the Bills are going to practice with the Steelers. And who knows if Damar Hamlin's going to make this team. The Bills could keep 4 or 5 safeties. I think 3 of them are roster locks, and Mike Edwards, Taylor Rapp, and Cole Bishop. And then you have Cam Lewis, Damar Hamlin, D. Delaney all vying for that 4th spot. And then what if the team brings in Micah Hyde, right? Then you're just is there any roster spots available? And not only is Damar Hamlin from Pittsburgh and played his college ball at Pittsburgh, and I think he even said he'd love to finish his career with the Steelers. Not only all of that, but the Steelers do have a need at safety. So you could see this potentially being a logical opportunity. And, maybe the Bills can trade him, something like that. But I think that's an underrated subplot of the joint practices with the Steelers is, a little exposure for Pittsburgh to Damar Hamlin. All right, folks, that's going to do it for us here today on the podcast. I hope that you enjoyed. I hope that you'll come back and make sure that you're subscribed. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share this podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills, and I look forward to catching up with you again tomorrow.